Hi, this video is going to look at free trade and protectionism as a key topic to revise for A-level business. So very topical at the moment when I'm recording this in 2025 because Donald Trump has recently been elected and one of his key international trade policies appears to be using protectionist measures. Okay, so free trade. Trade, what we're talking about here is exports and imports, products coming into a country and products leaving a country. That's what trade is. Free trade occurs when countries trade with each other with no protectionist measures it encourages people to buy stuff from abroad to import it, but also to export products as well, sell stuff to people abroad. Protectionism is the opposite of that, where we're trying to encourage consumers to buy domestically produced goods rather than buy imports. So, in a business exam, we're less worried about the political, the economic impact of this. We're worried about the impact on individual businesses. So, businesses benefit from free international trade, basically in terms of either revenues or costs. The benefits to businesses of being able to engage in free trade include being able to sell to customers abroad. You get to spread your risk over multiple markets. It's a source of growth for businesses. That means we can bring in the topic of economies of scale. Okay, if I can increase my output, I can start to benefit from purchasing, technical, managerial economies of scale, driving down my average unit costs. So that's a cost benefit alongside, of course, being able to source lower cost raw materials, maybe being able to source lower cost labour because part of free trade can be free movement of people. That was something we saw in the EU where people were able to move abroad without visas and work. So lots of cost benefits, lots of revenue benefits to businesses for engaging in free trade. However, there are some concerns. There's going to be increased competition, particularly if you're a developing country that doesn't have terribly efficient businesses yet, going up against the world's best car manufacturers, the world's best, clothing manufacturers. When you're just an infant industry, you're just a developing economy trying to get off their feet, can be quite hard for those businesses in that country. So there's the risk that these very efficient, low-cost multinational companies can drive domestic companies out of business. There can be environmental and ethical concerns. If as part of international trade, you go and manufacture in a low-wage country. Okay, we hear terrible stories sometimes from multinationals employing people in poor conditions, not adhering to health and safety laws. There was a terrible incident at a factory in Bangladesh 10, 15 years ago where it collapsed and about 2,000 people died, and Primark were found to be producing clothing in that factory. Big risk of diseconomies of scale due to international trade because we increase output so much, but we've got supply chain, logistical complexity, right? Lots of risk of poor communication as a result of business growth on a global scale. So diseconomies of scale, inefficiency might set in. And there's the risk of exchange rate fluctuations as well, which makes it difficult to plan. So I'll cover exchange rates in a different video on this playlist. All right, so free trade has benefits and costs. So does protectionism. So protectionism is where we take steps to protect our domestic businesses. Why do we do that? There's a bunch of reasons. Protecting domestic jobs. Trump is big on this. Protecting businesses from foreign competition, particularly unfair foreign competition. For example, the Chinese government is accused of providing subsidies for industries like steel, which means Chinese steel is very cheap. And maybe we want to protect our own steel producers against that. Strategic industries are things like weapons manufacturers, telecommunications. Okay, we might want domestic companies to provide our water, our electricity, our gas, so that they're not in the hands of foreign agents, basically. And infant industries are infant industries that are getting off the ground, but if they're subjected to full international competition, they might not survive. So, a few reasons there for protectionism, perhaps the last two being the strongest. There's a whole range of protectionist measures that we can apply. Tariffs are in the news a lot at the moment as I speak in May 2025. This is a tax on imported goods. It makes them more expensive and therefore less attractive to consumers. Quotas restrict the amount that can be imported. Governments can make it difficult for foreign companies to operate by passing certain laws, and also governments can provide subsidies to domestic firms, which basically reduces their costs and makes it easier for them to compete. So these are all protectionist measures, most of which are listed in the specifications to be aware of. Okay, so how does protectionism affect businesses? Okay, well, there are some benefits because domestic businesses should benefit because basically protectionism makes imports more expensive. So that gives them a cost, domestic businesses, cost price advantage, and therefore should help them sell more. And they'll earn more money, basically, which they can reinvest in their company and get them off the ground. However, on the downside, history suggests that there's often retaliation from trade partners when one country imposes tariffs. Retaliatory tariffs come back in place, and that makes it more difficult to sell stuff abroad. When you protect your domestic businesses from foreign competition, it can actually create complacency. Okay, there's less incentive to invest. An analogy to use is like a sports team. Sports teams often want to play people who are slightly better than them. Why? Because it makes them raise their game and make them better. If you are protecting your domestic businesses from the most efficient businesses, they have no incentive to make themselves better. And so a risk of protectionism is it makes businesses complacent, they don't invest, they don't become more efficient, and they never get themselves off the ground, and they never can compete fairly with these great international companies. Businesses that are protected by protectionism have less incentive to innovate because why would they? Innovation's expensive, they're being protected. So protectionism isn't always good for businesses for those reasons.